I remember the desert like it was a living thing that night, silent, vast, and impossibly empty. The sand shimmered pale under a thin crescent moon, every dune stretched like a shadow frozen in time. A faint hum floated through the air, so soft I almost thought it was in my head. The stars above weren't just distant points, they seemed to pulse, almost aware of me, as if something unseen was watching from the darkness between them. I walked slowly, boots sinking into cool, dry sand, and each step echoed like a secret I wasn't meant to hear. Then the wind shifted, carrying a strange, metallic scent, and I thought I saw a light move across the horizon. Not the usual flicker of a plane, not even a shooting star, something deliberate, gliding. My heart slowed and sped at the same time, suspended between wonder and unease. That's when I saw it. The sand was cold beneath my bare feet. The crescent moon hung low, slicing the sky with silver. Wind moved across the dunes, soft. Almost reverent, I walked alone. The desert stretched endlessly, a quiet nothing, broken only by the faint hiss of shifting grains. Each step sank slightly, leaving an imprint that the wind erased before I could look back. Far ahead, a flicker. A pale light hovering just above the ground. It trembled, not quite steady. A glow like ash caught in glass. Curiosity pressed against the edges of my fear. I slowed. Every breath pulled the night closer. The hum of the wind carried whispers I thought I understood. But maybe I didn't. The dunes rose and fell like slow waves. Shadows gathered in the hollows, pooling in corners of my vision. For a moment I imagined something moving beneath them. I stepped closer. The light pulsed softly, then vanished. Nothing remained but sand and the silence. My heart tightened. A soft rustle reached my ears. I paused, straining against the emptiness, hoping it was just the wind, but the stillness felt wrong. Too heavy. A presence, something faint, almost human, seemed to mirror my steps. I turned. Nothing. Yet the feeling lingered, curling around my ankles like smoke. The moonlight skimmed the ridges of the dunes, painting them silver white. Each grain glinted in its own quiet rhythm. I could smell dry earth, hot sand cooled by night, a faint tang of something I couldn't name. The desert hummed softly. Not music, more like the air itself, remembering movement. It wrapped around me, patient, waiting. I took another step. Soft, careful. The whisper of sand beneath my feet became louder in the emptiness. The light had been gone so long I almost believed it was a trick of the mind. Almost. Then, a shadow shifted where there should have been none. Just at the edge of vision, too quick, too subtle, I dared not blink. My skin prickled. The wind carried a strange taste, metallic, dry, and cold. Every dune looked like a possibility, every shadow a question. I whispered into the night, though no one could hear me. Words dissolved in the wind before they reached any ears. Only the sand answered with a soft sigh brushing against my legs. The light was gone. The shadow lingered, a suggestion more than form. I couldn't tell if it followed or simply waited. I pressed on. Feet sinking, sand scattering. The air was thin, cool, and unwelcoming. I remembered the way the dunes had looked under the pale glow. Waves of silver rolling endlessly, and yet that single flicker had seemed so alive. The night deepened. Silence stretched between the dunes like a held breath. I felt small, fragile, a visitor in a world that didn't want me. Another rustle, faint, almost a sigh. A thought passed too quickly to catch. Maybe the desert is patient. Maybe it watches quietly. I stopped, breathed, listened. Nothing moved, and yet the unease stayed, like a finger tracing the line of my spine. A presence imagined or real. There, always there. The dunes kept their secrets. The pale light never returned, but I felt it in the silence. And in the shadow that never left my side, I walked on, alone, the desert holding me in its quiet, curious gaze. And though fear pressed at my chest, I couldn't stop looking for that faint, trembling glow. The desert held its breath. Cool sand pressed against my palms as I crouched low. The crescent moon cast long, trembling shadows across the rocks. A hum began, low and steady, almost beneath perception. Not mechanical, not wind, It vibrated through my bones, as if the earth itself remembered something I could not. I stayed still, listening, feeling the pulse crawl along my spine. The stars above seemed to dim, one by one. Shadows stretched unnaturally, curling around boulders like black smoke. The night felt thicker here, almost liquid, pressing against my chest. I wanted to move, yet curiosity rooted me. The hum was alive, watching, waiting, aware of me. Each breath was sharp. The taste of dry sand lingered on my tongue. A faint metallic tang floated on the wind. The desert had changed. Rocks no longer seemed solid. They breathed softly, shifting under the pale moonlight. I crouched lower, close to the ground, feeling the hum beneath my knees, through my fingertips. Every grain of sand shivered with it. It rose slightly, then fell. The vibration moved through me in waves like invisible hands tracing my ribs. The wind joined in, carrying whispers I almost understood. The hum was patient. It didn't hurry. It didn't pause for comfort. Then abruptly it stopped. Everything halted in that instant. The silence was heavier than the hum itself. I froze. The desert had gone mute. No wind, no rustling sand, no movement. Even my heartbeat sounded wrong. Too loud, too uneven. My ears rang with what had just been. Shadows clung to every curve of the dunes. The rocks seemed darker, closer. I imagined eyes watching from within. I wanted to speak, but no words would come. Only breath, shallow and trembling, escaped my lips. A soft gust of wind brushed my face. It smelled of dry stone and distant thunder. It carried a hint of something older. Something not human. The hum hadn't returned. Yet the memory of it lingered in the bones of the desert. I could feel it pressing against me, still alive in the empty air. I rose slowly, letting my palms drag through the sand. Every step echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. I tried to convince myself it was only the desert, but the shadows whispered otherwise. And in the dim starlight, I could swear something moved behind the rocks. I walked, careful, slow, every step leaving a mark that vanished almost immediately. The desert held me in its quiet grip, watching, patient. I did not know what had hummed or why it stopped. All I knew was that I had been very small and very alone. The night stretched endlessly, and I kept moving, haunted by vibration that had touched my bones, a presence I could neither see nor name. Lingering in the darkness, waiting, the desert was impossibly still. Cold air brushed my cheeks, carrying the dry scent of sand and stone. Above me, the sky stretched wide, clearer than I had ever remembered. Stars glittered sharply, each one a distant eye watching quietly. The moon had hidden behind a thin veil of haze, leaving silver shadows to sway across the dunes. The wind whispered softly, brushing grains of sand against my fingers. I looked to the horizon. A figure appeared, dark, humanoid, but not quite human. It moved across the dunes silently. No run, no walk, no flight I recognized. It glided, or perhaps it drifted, like a shadow carried on the wind. My mouth went dry. My hands trembled, brushing against the rough grains of sand. Every heartbeat echoed loud in my ears, unsteady, too fast, too sharp. The stars seemed to pulse, brighter then dimmer, as if reacting to the figure's presence. Shadows around the rocks deepened unnaturally, curling in corners where the moonlight did not reach. The air hummed faintly, like static pressing against my skin. I blinked, and it was gone. The space it had occupied shimmered faintly, like heat haze or broken glass. A static-like distortion lingered, hovering in the cold desert air. I could feel it brushing against me, soft and unreal, vibrating against my chest. I swallowed, but my throat had tightened. The wind carried a faint tang of metal and dust, blending together into something sharp and cold. Each dune around me seemed taller now, more imposing, as though watching. I stepped forward, careful, feet sinking into sand that had settled into quiet waves. The stillness pressed against me, patient, relentless. For a moment, I imagined it returning. A soft shiver ran down my spine. I could almost hear the faintest rustle of movement, too subtle to name. The stars above were still and sharp, like frozen diamonds. Yet I felt something between them, something moving in a space I could not see, a presence that was both wonder and dread. My shadow stretched long and thin across the dunes. I shivered. The desert smelled of cold stone and something older, waiting just beyond recognition. I stood, trembling, breath shallow. The shimmer had faded, leaving nothing but emptiness and silence heavier than any I had known. The figure was gone, yet the memory of its movement lingered, tracing the edges of my vision. I walked slowly, letting my fingers trail over sand ridges. Every grain seemed to hum faintly beneath my touch. The night held me in its quiet, patient gaze, indifferent, yet aware. I didn't know what I had seen. Not human, not shadow. Something in between, in the space where light bends and reality blurs. The desert stretched endlessly, a dark sea beneath a sky sharp and cold. And though nothing moved, I felt watched. I felt small. I felt incomplete. The figure had left no trace, only the faint shimmer and the echo of my own heartbeat, shivering in the silence beneath impossible stars. The desert stretched in endless waves of silver and shadow. The wind carried cold grains of sand across my skin. Night pressed close, quiet, almost watchful. I noticed footprints, faint, almost erased. I wasn't sure if they were mine, or something else's. Each step I took seemed to echo behind me, soft, deliberate, but impossible. I was alone. The sand was cool under my fingers as I crouched to examine them. They were too large, too deep in some places, yet strangely human in shape. The moonlight skimmed the edges of the dunes, reflecting off scattered grains. Shadows pooled in the hollows, dark and patient. Every ridge seemed taller, sharper, like it was listening. I followed the prints, step by careful step. The hum of wind whispered across the dunes, brushing my face and neck. The tracks led to a shallow depression. A circle pressed into the sand, smooth and unnatural. No craft, no object. Nothing that explained it. The desert held its breath. Every grain seemed frozen, waiting for something I couldn't see. I could taste the dry sand on my lips. A soft static hummed in the air, or maybe in my head. The impression in the sand seemed alive, like it had just been made, or was still being made. I ran my hand over the edges, feeling warmth where none should be. Curiosity pressed against my fear. I leaned closer, tracing the subtle ridges with trembling fingers. The wind whispered around me, brushing my ears with secrets I could not understand. The footprints continued, fading into the dunes, swallowed by shadows. I followed, though the sand beneath my feet shifted unnaturally as if resisting me. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper, colder. The depression stayed behind me like a ghost. I could see it in the corner of my vision, lingering. No sound came from it, only stillness. Only the faint, unnatural pulse of the sand beneath. I paused. The desert was too quiet. The wind had stopped. Even my heartbeat seemed loud, echoing in the emptiness. I imagined shapes moving just beyond sight. Soft, deliberate, following, or waiting. The footprints in the sand whispered of a presence just beyond recognition. I stepped back, brushing the sand from my hands. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with the dry heat of the dunes. The shadows seemed to shift, curling closer, stretching longer. I could feel the depression beneath the moonlight. It was impossible to ignore. Curiosity and dread pressed against each other in my chest. I wanted to move closer. And yet something warned me to stay away. The footprints faded entirely. The desert returned to its quiet rhythm. The depression remained, silent, patient, a question with no answer. I walked slowly away, leaving the tracks behind. Every grain of sand seemed to hum faintly beneath my feet. The night pressed close, watching, waiting. And though I was alone, I did not feel safe. The dunes stretched endlessly. The pale moon lingered above. And the memory of the tracks, the silence in the depression, followed me, soft and persistent, into the darkness. The desert night pressed close. Cool sand brushed against my ankles. The moon was pale, spilling thin light across the dunes. A sudden gust of wind rose. It carried whispers, fragmented words almost human. I strained to listen, but the meaning slipped through my mind. The air felt heavier, as if the desert itself leaned closer. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the sand, curling around rocks, pooling in hollows. Each grain seemed alive, shifting under the invisible weight of sound. I tried to follow the whispers. Leaning forward, breath caught in my chest. The words fractured, dissolving before I could grasp them. The wind swirled, brushing my face and neck with cold fingers. A faint metallic tang filled the air. It mixed with the dry, hot smell of sand. I stood very still. Every movement seemed too loud. The hum of the desert had vanished. The shadows grew longer, darker. The dunes seemed closer, pressing inward. Even the moonlight felt hesitant, thinning over ridges and hollows. I whispered softly, almost hoping to answer. Nothing returned. The wind silenced the instant I tried to focus, leaving a hollow heavier than before. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and uneven. Every rustle of sand sounded deliberate. Every ridge, every hollow, held the faintest suggestion of movement. The whispers came again, fleeting, scattered. A syllable, a murmur. Gone before recognition. It felt as if the desert remembered voices I should not hear. I crouched, tracing the curve of a dune with trembling fingers. The wind brushed again, teasing my hair and cheeks. A faint taste of iron lingered on my lips. The air thickened, almost tangible, like it carried weight. Shadows stretched farther, merging, dark and patient. I imagined eyes hidden within, silent but aware. The gusts died suddenly. Silence swallowed the dunes. Even the stars seemed to dim in response, holding their light in quiet. I stood, unsteady, feeling the desert breathe around me. The whispers were gone. The wind had turned away, leaving only stillness. I walked slowly, fingertips brushing over sand ridges. Every grain seemed to hum faintly beneath my touch, a memory of sound just passed. The shadows followed silently, stretching, waiting, patient. Curiosity pressed against fear, tight and cold in my chest. The desert seemed endless, indifferent, yet aware. And though nothing moved, I felt the whispering wind lingering, brushing against my skin and memory. I exhaled, letting breath drift into the night. The dunes held their secret. The silence remained, heavier than any sound. And I walked onward, small and alone, the wind's whispers echoing softly in the hollow of my mind. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a pale moon. Cool wind brushed across my skin, carrying dust and faint metallic tangs. The dunes rose and fell like slow waves, silvered in moonlight. Ahead, something shifted. A strange static shimmered across the distant horizon. Like a television screen suspended in the air, broken and alive, the effect twisted the familiar desert. Ridges and hollows warped, bending light into angles that shouldn't exist. Shadows flickered in unnatural patterns. I moved closer, each step careful, sinking slightly into cold, shifting sand. The wind whispered, brushing my ears and neck. Every grain seemed to ripple beneath my fingers as I walked. The static pulsed faintly, vibrating through the dunes. Not sound, not entirely. A pressure in the air, a sensation beneath my skin. The desert seemed different here. Breath caught in my chest, heartbeat loud in the silence. The dunes shimmered like liquid metal, folding and stretching. I stepped forward, hand trailing across the sand. The cool grains slipped and shifted beneath my fingers. A faint hum, or perhaps the desert itself, throbbed under my touch. Closer. The shimmer twisted with me, bending the edges of perception. Rocks and shadows folded into patterns that made no sense. The air smelled faintly of ozone, dry and sharp. Every ridge seemed alive, rippling, shifting just beyond my comprehension. The moonlight glanced off the strange distortion, pale and hesitant. I blinked, and it was gone. The static vanished. The desert returned to itself, calm and still. The sand lay flat, ridges and shadows ordinary once more. I paused, hand hovering above the rippled grains. I questioned what I had seen. A trick of light or something else entirely? The night held its quiet. The wind softened, carrying only dust and the faintest memory of shimmer. The dunes seemed indifferent, patient, yet watching. I ran my fingers through sand, smooth and cold. The memory of the shifting, vibrating dunes lingered. A question pressed against my mind, impossible to answer. I stepped back, letting the static fade entirely from thought. The desert stretched endlessly. Shadows curled in the hollows. The moon rested pale above. I walked on slowly, each step soft, deliberate, careful not to disturb the quiet. Yet the memory of the horizon shimmered in the corners of my vision, twisting the familiar desert into something I could not fully trust. The dunes returned to normal, and yet I felt small, alone, questioning what was real and what the night had whispered to me. The desert was quiet but heavy. Sand shifted gently under my feet, cold and coarse. The moon cast pale light, stretching the dunes into long, sharp shapes. I looked down at my shadow. It moved with me, yet something was wrong, elongated, disconnected, almost alive. I stopped, held my breath. It lingered in the sand, twitching softly, as if unsure. Every time I turned my gaze elsewhere, it changed. The edges blurred. A subtle delay, like a faint echo of motion, watching. The air felt thick. A faint metallic tang mingled with the dry scent of sand. The dunes seemed closer, pressing inward, patient. I took a careful step. The shadow followed, but not perfectly. It stretched in ways that made my chest tighten, my heartbeat loud in the emptiness. I paused again. The desert was alive with something unseen. Movement curled in the hollows, wrapping around rocks and ridges. Eyes I could not see pressed close. Shadows shifted around the dunes, folding into corners. Every time I moved, they rearranged, lingering too long, twisting strangely. Even when my shadow aligned again, I felt the gaze of something patient and watching. I brushed my hands through the sand. Cool grains slipped between my fingers, grounding me. But the feeling did not leave. It pressed against my spine, low and insistent. I breathed slowly. The wind whispered faintly, brushing ears and neck, carrying no words, only the faintest vibration of presence. The night hummed quietly, patient, expectant. The shadow stretched again, a tremor of unnatural movement. It was mine, and not mine. A reflection that remembered, but also anticipated. I moved forward, careful, feet sinking into sand ridges, leaving soft impressions. Each step echoed too long in the silent dunes. I glanced at my shadow one last time. It had returned to shape, aligned with me. But the memory of its misalignment lingered. The desert felt oppressive, alive with eyes I could not see. The moon lighted the dunes softly, but the shadows remained deeper, longer, untrustworthy. I exhaled. Every breath carried the dry taste of sand and something colder, metallic. Even as I walked, the sensation of being watched stayed. The dunes stretched endlessly. Shadows clung to every curve and hollow. And though nothing moved, I knew something followed, patient, silent, and waiting in the dark. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a pale, fragile moon. The sand pressed cold against my fingertips. Air tasted dry, with a faint metallic tang drifting faintly on the wind. I looked up. The sky flickered. A sudden fracture split it like shattered glass. Stars vanished. In their place, bright geometric patterns hovered silently. Grids of light, precise, impossible, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The desert around me seemed smaller, confined. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the moonlight. The sand beneath my feet rippled faintly, shifting as though responding to the sky. I froze. Breath caught in my chest. The patterns were alive. They rotated imperceptibly, bright lines bending and folding, forming shapes I could not name. The air hummed faintly, vibrating against my skin. A cold pressure pressed against my temples, as if the horizon itself had leaned closer. I wanted to move, to step back, but the dunes held me in place, patient and silent. Every ridge and hollow seemed exaggerated, shadows longer than they should be. The grids pulsed again, a slow rhythm, steady and deliberate, echoing faintly in the emptiness. The desert smelled of dry stone and faint ozone, sharp against the calm night. I swallowed. The wind whispered lightly, brushing ears and neck, carrying nothing but a faint static hum. The patterns rotated slowly, folding over themselves, then stretched infinitely, and then they were gone. The sky returned to empty, cold, and black. Stars reappeared one by one, pale and hesitant. The desert returned to stillness as if it had never changed. I exhaled. Hands brushing sand, cool and fine. The memory of geometry lingered, twisting the edges of what I thought I knew. Shadows returned to their ordinary shapes. The wind softened, carrying only the scent of dry earth and faint ozone. Yet the desert felt different, larger, quieter, alive with patient observation. I walked slowly, leaving soft footprints in the sand. Every ridge beneath my feet seemed to hum faintly, a faint reminder of the fractured sky. I kept looking up. Though the stars were back, the memory of impossible grids pressed on my mind. A feeling of awe and dread coiled in my chest, quiet, slow, lingering. The dunes stretched endlessly, pale beneath the moon. The sky above held only black and silver, and yet I knew I had seen something that the desert would not let me forget. The desert night pressed close. Sand shifted beneath my feet, cool and fine. The moon hung low, casting pale light over scattered rocks. I stumbled across them, hands brushing against rough edges. Every ridge and crevice seemed sharper, more defined under the moon. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Precise, echoing softly in the distance. Each step paused when I paused. Each resumed when I moved. My breath caught, shallow and tight in my chest. I dared not turn. The sound was everywhere and nowhere at once. Shadows clung to rocks, curling around hollows, patient and deliberate. The wind carried a faint tang of metal and dust. It brushed my face and neck, cold and insistent. Every grain of sand seemed to hum softly beneath my fingertips. I moved slowly. The footsteps mirrored me perfectly, a rhythm locked to my own. I swallowed, feeling dry sand on my tongue. The hum of the night pressed against my ears. Even the stars seemed hesitant, faint, as though aware of the presence. The desert held its breath. Shadows stretched unnaturally across dunes and boulders. I could almost sense eyes in the hollows, unseen but patient. I paused. The footsteps paused. Silence pressed closer than the desert had before. A faint static seemed to vibrate through the air. I could feel it in my chest, low and steady. The sand beneath my hands shifted subtly, almost alive. I dared a soft step forward. The rhythm resumed, echoing each movement. I froze again. The desert pressed against me, patient and unblinking. Then the footsteps stopped. Gone. Only the memory remained, echoing in my mind, a rhythm that pressed against the edges of perception. I exhaled slowly, letting my breath drift into the night. Shadows returned to ordinary shapes. The rocks were still. The sand, cool beneath my fingers. I stepped back, soft, careful, leaving no trace of movement. The desert returned to its quiet, endless state. And yet, the memory of the footsteps lingered, soft and precise, following me long after they had vanished. The desert night was heavier than before. Sand pressed cold against my fingers. The moon hung pale, thin, spilling soft silver across the dunes. A sharp metallic smell cut through the dry air. It clung to my skin, crawling across my arms and neck. I breathed shallowly, tasting dust mixed with iron. I noticed reflections, faint, shifting glimmers across distant dunes. They moved independently of the wind, twisting like they had minds of their own. I paused. The air felt thicker, heavier, pressing against my chest. Something unseen was near, watching. Every step I took seemed louder than it should be. Footfalls sinking softly into sand ridges, yet echoing faintly in the quiet. The desert held its breath, patient and still. Shadows shifted unnaturally around the dunes. The metallic scent grew sharper as I moved. I could almost feel it pressing against my skin, brushing my hair with invisible fingers. I swallowed hard. The taste of iron lingered on my tongue. Every ridge, every hollow seemed exaggerated under the pale moonlight. The reflections danced, subtle and deliberate. Not wind, not sand. Something deliberate, studying my movement, mirroring, observing. I kept walking, heart pounding in my chest. Hands brushed over grains of sand, cold and sharp beneath my fingers. Every step echoed. but the reflections followed, patient, precise. The night pressed close. Shadows stretched, curling around rocks and ridges. The desert seemed alive, holding its presence just beyond perception. I paused again. The metallic scent filled my nose, sharp, lingering. The reflections shifted slowly, like they were aware of my attention, teasing, deliberate. I exhaled softly. The wind stirred faintly, brushing against my neck and ears. Still, the desert remained silent, heavy, and watchful. I walked onward, each step cautious, careful, deliberate. The dunes stretched endlessly before me, pale in moonlight, cold beneath my fingertips. The metallic odor lingered, faint but persistent. The reflections had vanished for now. Yet the feeling of being observed remained, soft and insistent, a presence brushing against the edges of perception. I kept moving, alone. The desert held its secret, patient and unreadable. And though nothing moved, I knew something unseen had been there, and would continue to be, watching, waiting, silent beneath the pale light of the moon. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a pale, fragile moon. Sand shifted cold beneath my fingers. The air tasted faintly of iron and dry stone. Then I saw them, small lights darting across the horizon. Irregular bursts, too quick, too precise. I tried to follow them. Each blink seemed faster than possible. They twisted the edges of the desert, turning ridges and hollows into illusions. Shadows pooled strangely around rocks and dunes. The wind whispered faintly, brushing my ears, my neck, carrying nothing but cold air. The sand beneath my fingers seemed to ripple subtly, alive in response. I stepped forward, careful, slow. The lights darted again, impossible angles, unbound by gravity or reason. Each blink left a faint trail in the corner of my vision, fading before comprehension. The horizon twisted. Sand and sky folded into one another, ridges bleeding into shadows. I felt small, insignificant. A low hum pressed softly against my chest. Not sound exactly, but vibration in the bones, subtle and patient. The desert itself seemed aware, holding its breath. The lights pulsed again, faster now, darting in patterns that defied understanding. The air smelled dry, metallic, and sharper with each movement. I crouched, fingertips brushing the ridges of sand. Each grain seemed to hum faintly, echoing the rhythm of impossible flashes. The moonlight was hesitant, scattered by the irregular bursts. I tried to blink, to focus, to understand. But the lights evaded every attempt, faster than thought. Shadows twisted unnaturally around me, stretching longer, curling in hollows. The desert seemed infinite, folding endlessly beneath my gaze. The horizon quivered, shimmering. My heartbeat was loud, echoing in the still night. And then they vanished. The horizon returned to normal, ridges and dunes once again ordinary. The air calmed, wind soft against my neck and ears. I exhaled slowly. The desert remained quiet, still, patient. The sand beneath my fingers was cold, ordinary once more, yet the memory lingered. The impossible rhythm of blinking lights, the horizon that had twisted, the sense of being watched, small and insignificant in the vastness. I walked onward, careful and slow, each step soft, deliberate. The dunes stretched endlessly under pale moonlight. The lights were gone. But I knew somewhere just beyond vision, something had been there, patient, watching, waiting. The desert stretched silent beneath a pale, indifferent moon. Sand shifted softly beneath my fingers, cool and dry. The air smelled faintly of stone and something sharp, metallic. I sensed it before I saw it. A presence, no shadow, no footprint. Every nerve in my body tensed, muscles coiled beneath the skin. Breath shallow, tight, hesitant. I turned my head slowly. Every ridge, every hollow seemed ordinary, and yet I knew I was not alone. The wind whispered faintly across the dunes. Cold air brushed my neck, carrying nothing but stillness. The sand beneath my fingertips trembled almost imperceptibly. I stepped forward cautiously. Saw footprints pressed into the sand, my own, only my own. But the feeling lingered. A patient, silent observer. Shadows curled unnaturally around rocks and hollows. Moonlight stretched thin, fragile across the dunes. The desert stillness pressed against me, heavy and knowing, I exhaled softly. The sensation of being watched pressed closer, brushing ears and neck with invisible fingers. Every turn of my head promised an answer. A movement, a shape, but none came. The desert seemed alive, patient. Each ridge and hollow exaggerated under the pale light. The sand beneath my hands cold, solid, ordinary. I breathed carefully, slow, deliberate. The air carried a faint hum, subtle, resonant against my bones. The dunes seemed to fold slightly as if responding to the presence. I paused. Soft footsteps in my mind echoed my own, though nothing followed. I was alone, yet not alone. Shadows twisted subtly in corners of vision. Moonlight trembled across the sand. Every ridge seemed longer, deeper, heavier. I exhaled slowly, letting my breath drift into the still night. The desert remained calm, patient, unreadable, and yet the feeling of being watched persisted, quiet and insistent. I walked onward, careful, deliberate, soft. The dunes stretched endlessly beneath the fragile moon. Each step pressed gently into sand, leaving fleeting impressions. The invisible watcher remained. No shape, no sound, only presence, patient and unyielding. I kept moving, heart tight in my chest. The night held its secret, and though the desert appeared ordinary once more, I knew it had never truly let me go. The desert stretched quietly beneath a pale crescent moon. Sand shifted softly beneath my fingers, cool and fine. The air carried the faint, dry scent of stone and distant heat. I noticed them, symbols etched into the sand, precise, geometric, glowing faintly in the moonlight. I hadn't made them. I had never seen them before. The edges seemed impossibly sharp, deliberate. A quiet hum vibrated through my chest. Not loud, but insistent, pressing against ribs and collarbones. The dunes seemed to lean closer, patient, aware. I crouched slowly, fingertips hovering over the glowing lines. Sand slipped between my fingers, cold and granular. The symbols pulsed faintly, like they were breathing. Shadows stretched and twisted around rocks and hollows. The desert smelled sharper now, metallic, as if anticipation had weight. Every ridge seemed exaggerated, every dune alive with subtle movement. I stepped forward cautiously. The hum intensified slightly, vibrating through the soles of my feet. The symbols remained, unchanged, yet undeniably aware. I exhaled slowly. The wind whispered faintly across the sand, brushing ears and neck. Nothing else moved, yet the desert felt sentient, patient, watching. The glow shifted subtly. Lines warped in corners of my vision, edges bending almost imperceptibly. The desert seemed to pulse in rhythm with the quiet hum. I traced a fingertip along one symbol. Cool, granular sand beneath my touch. It felt alive, resonating softly against my skin. I paused. Every sense sharpened. The desert held its breath. Shadows clung longer, stretching toward the moonlight. I stepped back, careful, soft. The symbols pulsed once more, faintly. The hum lingered in my chest, a low reminder of presence. The dunes stretched endlessly. Moonlight touched the sand lightly, reflecting faint glimmers from the symbols. The air smelled faintly metallic, dry, unyielding. I walked slowly, leaving soft impressions in the sand. The symbols remained behind me, patient and unchanging. The desert had shifted subtly in their presence, curious or aware of me, and I felt small beneath the expanse of moonlit dunes. The hum faded slowly as I moved away. Shadows settled into ordinary shapes once more. Yet the memory of glowing geometry lingered. Quiet, deliberate. A presence that the desert would not relinquish. The desert stretched endless beneath a pale, fragile moon. Cold sand pressed against my fingers, granular and shifting. The night air smelled faintly of stone and something distant, metallic. A distant light blinked on the horizon. Small, fragile. I focused on it, heart tightening. And then it vanished. Just like that, leaving only empty space. The absence pressed against me. Colder than the air, heavier than the dunes themselves. I blinked, thinking I had missed it. But the horizon remained still, empty, silent. The desert had shifted subtly, folding into a quiet void. Shadows stretched longer, curling around ridges and hollows. The wind whispered faintly across the dunes, brushing ears and neck. Every grain of sand felt sharper beneath my fingertips. I stepped forward cautiously. The emptiness seemed to lean closer, pressing against the edges of perception. Cold air brushed my skin, carrying the faint tang of metal. My breath caught. Each inhale sharp, dry, brittle. The horizon remained patient and indifferent. I wanted to search, to find it again, but the desert held its silence tightly. Even the dunes seemed to pause as though aware of my scrutiny. The sand shifted under my hands, granular and subtle. I could feel the faint hum of the night in my chest. Not loud, but present, insistent. I turned slowly, scanning ridges and hollows. Shadows moved almost imperceptibly. Everything seemed ordinary, yet wrong. The emptiness lingered, pressing against my senses. A warning, though I could not name its source. The desert was colder, emptier than before. I exhaled softly. The night returned to its quiet rhythm, but I remained uneasy. The dunes stretched endlessly beneath pale moonlight. Every step echoed faintly, swallowed by sand and shadow. The vanished light was gone, but its absence remained. A silent, patient reminder of how small I was beneath the vast, unyielding desert. I walked on, careful and slow. The horizon stretched, still empty. The desert held its secret. And I knew it would remain, waiting, silent, unblinking beneath the pale, indifferent moon. The desert lay still beneath a fragile crescent moon. Sand shifted softly under my fingers, cold and granular. The night air smelled faintly of stone and distant heat. Then it came, a sudden chill brushing my neck. The air around me remained motionless, still as glass. I turned quickly. Only sand moved, drifting slowly over hidden ridges. Nothing else. The chill lingered. Subtle, insistent, like someone or something had exhaled directly onto me. I shivered, skin prickling under the pale moonlight. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the dunes. The wind whispered faintly, carrying dry metallic scents. Every ridge seemed sharper, deeper, waiting. I stepped forward slowly. Soft footsteps pressed into the sand behind me, yet none existed. The chill followed, brushing shoulders and neck with ghostly precision. My breath was shallow, tight. The desert seemed to lean closer, silent, patient. Every sense sharpened, nerves humming faintly. The sand beneath my fingers was cool and granular, shifting subtly. Shadows clung longer to hollows, curling toward the pale light. The night held me, pressing quietly against the edges of thought. I turned again, careful, soft. The chill persisted, brushing the back of my neck, insistent, quiet, impossible to locate. The moonlight trembled slightly across ridges and dunes. The desert felt alive, patient, aware of my unease. Each ridge and hollow exaggerated, stretching into the unseen. I exhaled slowly. The chill faded slightly, yet its presence lingered, a whisper across skin and senses, subtle and inescapable. I walked onward, careful and deliberate. The sand pressed lightly beneath my soles, each step soft and slow. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the fragile moon. The cold breath was gone, but the memory of it remained, patient, unseen, waiting just beyond reach, beneath the endless dunes. The desert stretched beneath a faint, slivered moon. Sand shifted softly under my fingers, cold and dry. The air smelled faintly of stone and distant heat. Above the dunes, I saw it, a dark figure gliding silently. Impossible, unnatural against the stars. It moved with no wings, no rhythm I could understand. Slow, deliberate, yet impossibly fluid. The night seemed to bend around it, stretching and folding. I held my breath. Heart tight, pulse sharp against ribs. The sand beneath my fingers trembled faintly, almost alive. I couldn't tell if it noticed me, or if I were invisible beneath its gaze. The desert seemed suspended, patient and silent. Shadows stretched along ridges and hollows. Moonlight trembled across the dunes, brushing the edges of my vision. Every ridge seemed sharper, deeper, more alien beneath the sky. I stepped backward slowly, careful, soft. The cool night air pressed against my neck. A faint hum vibrated through the soles of my feet, subtle and insistent. The figure remained above, gliding effortlessly. Its movement defied all reason. The The stars behind it seemed to shimmer and warp slightly, as if the sky itself bent to its presence. I exhaled slowly, letting my breath drift into the still night. The dunes pressed softly beneath my soles, granular and cold. Shadows curled longer, stretching toward the figure without reaching it. I tried to move forward. Each step felt heavier, measured, as though the desert itself had thickened beneath the moonlight. The figure paused above the tallest dune, then continued silently, gliding across the sky. Every motion impossible, deliberate, quiet. The desert smelled faintly metallic, sharp against the dry cool of the night. The air carried a sense of waiting, as though the dunes themselves were aware of what I saw. I stayed still, watching. Heart tight, muscles coiled beneath the skin. The figure moved with patience, effortless, neither acknowledging nor ignoring, simply existing above the dunes in silent observation. The wind shifted faintly, brushing hair and neck. The sand pressed softly beneath fingers and toes. The dark shape glided on, indifferent and impossible. I exhaled softly. The night returned to its slow rhythm. Yet the memory of the impossible figure remained, hovering above the dunes in the silent, patient desert. The desert lay quiet beneath a thin crescent moon. Cool air brushed my skin, carrying faint scents of stone and dry earth. Sand shifted gently beneath my fingers, soft and granular. I noticed it first in the periphery, a shimmer beneath my feet. Subtle, fleeting. Sand glimmered as if alive, tiny sparks dancing in the moonlight. I paused, breath caught. Each grain seemed to move differently when I wasn't looking. When my gaze lingered, the desert appeared still, patient, waiting. A soft rustle ran along the ridges, though the wind was still and the air pressed quietly against my neck. I stepped forward cautiously. The shimmer shifted, faint and impossible. It was subtle, almost polite, like the desert itself was breathing beneath my soles. I crouched to touch it. Cold sand slid through my fingers, granular, real. Yet a faint pulse lingered beneath, a hum that tickled the bones in my feet. I looked away. When I glanced back, the shimmer had subtly rearranged, each ridge and hollow slightly altered. I whispered to myself, softly, "Am I imagining this? Or is the desert moving around me unnoticed, patient?" Shadows stretched along dunes, curling in strange angles. The moonlight trembled over ridges, casting soft, sharp lines. Every step I took felt measured, as though the sand itself was aware of my presence. The shimmer pulsed faintly beneath the soles of my feet. It was quiet, persistent, like a heartbeat hidden in the earth. I breathed slowly, deliberately. The desert leaned in, silent, curious, watching me through subtle movement and light. I stepped back, then forward. Each motion shifted the sand just enough to notice, but never enough to fully understand. The air pressed coldly against my neck. The desert smelled faintly metallic, and the glimmer seemed to ripple faintly in response. I exhaled. The shimmer remained, subtle, impossible, patient. Each grain held its secret. Each ridge a question. I walked onward slowly, carefully. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the crescent moon. The sand shifted quietly beneath my steps, alive in a way that felt impossible, watching me, waiting, just beyond understanding. The desert stretched beneath a cold, slivered moon. Sand was hard and silent beneath my soles. The air smelled faintly of stone and dry heat. I looked up. The stars flickered, subtle at first. Then, almost imperceptibly, they shifted. Shapes formed in the darkness. Eyes, countless eyes, watching. No lids, no pupils, just awareness in points of light. A chill ran across my skin. My chest tightened. The desert was still. Yet I felt the weight of 1,000 unseen gazes. I held my breath. Each heartbeat echoed softly in my ears. Shadows twisted along ridges, sharp and impossible. I blinked. The shapes shimmered, realigning. Each star seemed deliberate, sentient. The air felt thicker, heavy, as if it leaned toward me. I swallowed slowly. The cold night pressed against my neck, sand shifting faintly beneath my fingers as I crouched. The eyes above didn't move like stars. They aligned, unblinking, patient, watching me, waiting for me. A faint rustle came from the dunes behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only sand, rigid, silent, unyielding. The stars pulsed gently, rhythmical and alien. Light traced across the desert, glinting off grains in soft waves. I felt the pulse in my chest, a quiet vibration that pressed against my ribs. I stepped forward. The eyes followed, not with movement but awareness, a presence heavier than wind, colder than stone. I crouched again, pressing hands into the cool sand. It smelled faintly metallic, sharp against the night. The sky shimmered subtly, as if it were breathing with the desert below. Every ridge seemed to lean toward me, every shadow deeper than natural. The air hummed faintly, just enough to tickle my ears. I breathed slowly, deliberately. The desert held its silence. The eyes did not blink, did not tire. I rose, trembling slightly, feeling the invisible weight of their gaze pressing against the skin. The desert stillness became a trap, and I was caught within it. I exhaled softly. The sky shimmered one last time, eyes flickering, pulsing, then returned to the normal glitter of stars. Yet the feeling remained. The pressure of being observed. Even as the desert stretched endlessly, quiet and empty beneath the moonlight, I knew something lingered, waiting. The desert lay under a deep, cold night. Sand was smooth beneath my feet, yet every step felt heavier than the last. The air hung motionless. No breeze, no shifting clouds, only the faint hum of the earth beneath the moon. Then I heard it. A rustling, soft and deliberate, moving through the dunes though the air did not stir. It came from everywhere at once, and nowhere. The sound pressed against my ears, resonated through my chest. I froze, heart pounding, breath caught, hands brushing against the cool grains of sand. The rustling shifted. Closer, further, as if the dunes themselves were alive, rearranging in silence just out of reach. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air, sharp, unexpected, biting the back of my throat. I swallowed slowly. The desert seemed aware of me. I crouched, feeling the sand beneath my palms, cold, granular, almost vibrating beneath my touch. Shadows lengthened unnaturally along the ridges. The darkness pressed toward me, quiet and immense. The sound paused, then resumed, irregular, teasing, a rhythm impossible to predict, echoing without source. I strained to see, but the dunes were still. Every grain of sand untouched, yet whispering secrets in tremors beneath my skin. I shifted a foot. The rustling stuttered. I froze again. The desert seemed to breathe with me, or against me. A thin fog began to gather at the edges of the dunes, cool and damp against my face. The rustling became sharper, crisper, fingers brushing unseen against the sand. I dared a small step forward. The sound mirrored me, but never revealed itself. It flickered along the periphery, dancing just beyond comprehension. I knelt, letting the weight of the silence press down, feeling every heartbeat, every breath, every shifting grain of sand under my palms. The rustling stopped suddenly. The desert returned to emptiness. No wind, no movement. Only the faint echo of a presence lingering in the silence, watching, patient, unseen. I rose slowly, skin prickling, eyes scanning every shadowed curve of the dunes. Nothing moved, but the desert had changed. It hummed softly, as if holding its breath, waiting for me to leave, or for something else to arrive. The night stretched endlessly, the moon cold and pale overhead. I walked forward, each step uncertain, the memory of that rustling following me like a shadow I could not shake. Even when the dunes appeared still again, I could feel it. Every grain beneath my feet seemed to tremble softly, alive in a way I could not name. And in that silence I understood. The desert was never empty. It only waited. The desert stretched under a pale, indifferent moon. The air was dry still. Each breath carried a faint grit against my tongue. Shadows clung to the dunes, elongated and uncertain. The silence pressed against my ears, deafening in its absence. Then a subtle vibration hummed through the sand, low, almost imperceptible. I paused, heart catching in my throat. Something or someone was moving. The ground beneath me shivered. Shadows shifted, not with the wind, but with a rhythm impossible to trace. I scanned the horizon. Nothing visible. Yet the desert felt heavier, expectant, like it was holding its breath. A distant light appeared, pale and static. It hovered briefly, then descended. No roar, no clatter. Just the soft tremor of the earth beneath my feet. The landing was precise, impossible. The sand barely indented, yet shadows sprawled unnaturally across the dunes. I wanted to step closer. Curiosity coiled tight in my chest, but instinct held me still. I could feel it watching, even from that distance. The air tasted metallic, cold against the back of my throat. Every nerve in my body stretched taut. The desert itself seemed to pulse with quiet energy, rippling across the surface in barely there waves. I squinted. The craft, or something like it, remained silent and still, yet alive. The faint glow of its surface reflected in the dunes, distorting shapes, twisting shadows. The vibration ceased, and with it, the desert went completely silent. No movement, no wind, only a heavy, waiting stillness. I dared not breathe too deeply. Even the faintest exhale seemed loud against the quiet. Each heartbeat was a drum in the vast emptiness. I shifted a foot. The sand whispered, not with wind, but as if acknowledging my presence. A soft, subtle acknowledgement. I imagined the shadowed shape moving, gliding across the dunes with impossibly smooth intent. I could feel it studying me, though it left no trace, no noise, no footprint. The moonlight revealed edges of something geometric. Angles too sharp, lines too straight, against the organic curves of the desert. Yet it remained distant, a silent observer in the emptiness. I swallowed. The metallic tang lingered, a faint reminder that I was not alone. The desert, usually indifferent, seemed to lean closer, attentive, alive with expectation. I stood still. Time stretched. The dunes held me in their quiet embrace. Every shadow trembled slightly, as though breathing with the object before me. Eventually, the distant glow dimmed. The subtle vibration faded into nothing. Silence returned, deeper and colder than before. And yet the feeling of being watched lingered. I took a careful step back. The sand whispered under my weight. Nothing followed. Nothing moved. But I knew the desert remembered. The night resumed its cold calm. Stars blinked softly overhead. The moon remained pale and distant, and the landing, silent and perfect, left only questions, and the unmistakable sense that the desert would not forgive curiosity. The desert was quiet. Too quiet. The moon hung low, pale and distant. Each step I took pressed softly into the sand. The grains whispered under my feet. Cool air brushed my face, carrying faint scents of dry earth and something metallic. Then I heard it. A step, not behind me, not ahead, but exactly matching mine. I froze, heart thrumming in my chest. It continued, echoing each footfall perfectly in rhythm, yet somehow offset, like a heartbeat out of sync with my own. I looked around. Nothing moved. Shadows sprawled across the dunes. Rustling sand whispered faintly, though the air was still. Each step I took, it followed. Soft, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I tried stopping. The echo stopped. I moved again. It moved again. I swallowed hard. The air tasted thin, metallic. My skin crawled under the quiet pressure. Every nerve stretched taut. The desert seemed alive with observation. Shadows shifted where no wind blew. The moonlight revealed angles that weren't quite natural. Sand rippled subtly, as though remembering each footstep. I dared not turn my head. The sensation of being mirrored was too complete, too deliberate. A cold certainty settled into my chest that I was not alone, that something moved with me, invisible yet present. I paused at a rise in the dunes. The echoing steps halted simultaneously. I held my breath, listening to the faint hum of the desert. Each heartbeat drummed in my ears. I dared a glance. Nothing visible. The sand lay still. The moon watched from above, indifferent. Yet the feeling persisted, a presence shadowing my every movement. Eyes unseen, intent unfathomable. I took another step. The echo resumed, soft, precise, every motion mirrored, every pause mirrored. The desert held me in its quiet embrace. Time stretched and thinned. I could feel the rhythm of the mirrored steps in my bones, an unnatural harmony with nothing. The sensation was not fear alone. It was isolation, a slow, creeping certainty that I was walking with a twin that existed only to follow, to echo, to observe. I slowed my pace. The echoed steps slowed. The desert listened. The moonlight glimmered off scattered rocks, and the shadows seemed to sway gently, alive in subtle acknowledgement. Eventually, I stopped. The echo stopped. Silence returned, but the tension lingered, like a held breath that refuses release. I exhaled slowly. The cool air felt heavier now. The sand beneath my feet was ordinary again, yet I could not shake the feeling that the desert had memorized my steps, that each motion had been noted, recorded by something I could not see. I walked on cautiously, every step measured, every breath deliberate, listening, waiting. The echo did not return, not immediately, but the memory of it clung to my senses, a quiet dread, a reminder that the desert watches, even when the eyes are invisible and the footsteps are your own. The desert lay quiet beneath a pale, indifferent moon. Shadows stretched across jagged rocks. The air smelled of dry stone and distant heat. I noticed it first as a faint glow, a soft, flickering light behind the jagged rocks ahead. It was distant, small, almost shy. Yet it called me closer, tugging at my senses. Each step I took stirred the sand softly. The grains whispered under my weight. Cool air brushed my neck, carrying a metallic tang. My heart thumped in response, slow and uneven. The glow pulsed faintly. It seemed to shift as I moved. I slowed, then paused. It flickered as if hiding from me. I crept closer, careful. The rocks loomed like jagged teeth, sharp edges catching the pale moonlight. The air smelled of dust and faint ozone. Each footfall was measured, soft, intentional. I leaned forward, straining, trying to catch the source without startling it. The glow faded as I approached, disappeared, leaving only a lingering hum in the air. A vibration that pressed against my chest. I stopped, listening. The hum lingered, almost alive. The desert felt aware, leaning closer. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the sand. I reached the rocks. Nothing visible. The glow had vanished completely. Yet the hum pulsed faintly, as if the light itself had left a memory behind. I traced the edges of the rocks with my hand. Cool, rough stone under my fingertips. The sand was still, the wind absent. Yet the desert seemed to breathe with me. I moved in a small circle, hoping to glimpse the source again. The light did not return. Only the hum remained, soft, distant, almost reverent. I inhaled slowly. The air smelled faintly metallic. The hum seemed to resonate inside my chest, a quiet presence. I stepped back, keeping the rocks between me and the empty space. The desert was vast, silent, waiting. The glow did not return. Only the memory of it lingered, a soft pulse beneath the quiet, a reminder that some things in this desert watch, even when unseen. I continued along the dunes, each step careful, each breath measured. The hum faded slowly behind me. The desert returned to its stillness, yet I felt its weight, heavy in the quiet, alive in the absence of light. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a cold, indifferent moon. Stars were scattered across a velvet sky, pale and still. The sand smelled faintly of dry stone, and the air pressed lightly against my skin. I walked slowly, each step soft against shifting dunes. The silence was heavy, almost alive. Then I noticed the horizon. It rippled, not like heat, not like wind. The dunes bent and wavered as if seen through water. Stars fractured, stretching into long, trembling lines. My eyes blinked and the effect wavered. I stopped, heart tight in my chest. Breath shallow. The air smelled faintly metallic, like static before a storm. The horizon shimmered again. Each ripple whispered uncertainty. I reached out with my gaze, trying to touch it, and it slipped away, folding the dunes back into their ordinary shapes. My steps faltered. The sand underfoot felt slightly different. Cooler, heavier, shifting almost when I wasn't looking. A soft hum tickled the edge of my hearing. I blinked again. The horizon was still, yet I could feel it, pressing against the edges of my vision, as if the desert itself was bending toward me. A distant shadow moved across the dunes, or maybe it had always been there. I couldn't tell. The desert held its breath, waiting for me to notice. I lifted a hand, brushing it over rough sand. Each grain whispered faintly under my touch. The horizon pulsed in silence, a quiet, imperceptible rhythm I could almost feel in my chest. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance. The shimmering returned in small flickers, edges of dunes bending, stars scattering, my vision questioning itself. Each step echoed lightly. Or was it the desert echoing me? The stillness seemed thicker here, almost tactile, brushing against my arms like cold silk. I stopped once more. The shimmer vanished. Dunes straightened. Stars returned to their rightful places. The desert looked normal, but my chest still felt the hum. The horizon, though calm, had left its mark. A tremor of unease, a quiet doubt that stretched longer than the dunes themselves. I continued walking, feet sinking softly into the familiar sand. The air smelled of dust and faint ozone. Each breath was deliberate, measured. Behind me, a faint ripple seemed to linger at the edge of my vision. Gone when I turned, but present in memory. The desert remained still, yet somehow it remembered me. I let the horizon fade from my thoughts, but the unease clung, soft, insistent, like a shadow brushing my skin, a quiet warning in the desert's endless silence. The desert was quiet beneath a pale, indifferent moon. Cool air brushed my skin, carrying the faint scent of dust and dry stone. Each step sank softly into the sand, my breaths shallow and measured. Shadows stretched long across the dunes, thin and flickering with the faint light. They moved differently than the land, leaning, curling, almost reaching toward me. I froze. The air felt heavier, as if it pressed lightly against my chest. A soft hum tickled at the edges of hearing, or maybe it was the desert itself holding its breath. Each shadow lengthened unnaturally. They bent and curled toward me like dark, deliberate fingers. The feeling of eyes, countless, invisible, followed my every motion. Every instinct screamed to run, but my feet remained rooted. A soft rustling traveled across the dunes. Not wind, not sand. Something deliberate. It made the silence thicker, heavier, almost tactile. I lowered my gaze. The shadows swayed slowly, stretching further. They touched the faint light like they could pull it into darkness. I felt the sand beneath my hands vibrate lightly, like the desert itself was aware of me. The cool night air tasted faintly of metal. A whisper of static brushed my ears. Breath caught in my throat. I wanted to turn, but the stretching shadows kept me still, their silent vigil both terrifying and hypnotic. The dunes seemed alive. Shadows lengthened and leaned closer. I sensed them watching, patient and deliberate. The sand smelled faintly of ozone, and every nerve in my body tensed in recognition. I tried to step forward, but the shadows mirrored my hesitation. Each movement felt measured, as if the darkness itself was keeping rhythm with me. The desert held its breath. Time stretched thin. The air felt thicker around my shoulders. Shadows curled higher, darker, leaning toward me in silent accusation. The stillness pressed against my ears, a faint hum of attention. I exhaled slowly. The shadows paused, like they waited for the next motion, the next faltering step. The moonlight trembled across the sand. I stepped back. They followed, never breaking their pattern. Not wind, not light, not sand. Only shadows, watching, patient, deliberate. Finally, I lowered my gaze completely. The desert remained quiet, yet the feeling lingered. Every shadow seemed aware. Every dune held a memory of my presence. And though the night appeared calm, I knew I was not alone. The hum faded to near silence. The shadows stretched back into their dunes. The desert exhaled softly. I moved forward, slowly, carrying the weight of unseen eyes.